The sound of my own name being typed into a computer keyboard by someone else shouldn't sound like a shovel hitting dirt. But as I sat in the corner of my study, watching my son, Marcus, and his wife Tara commandeer my digital life, that is exactly what it sounded like. It was a rhythmic tapping, like nails being driven into a coffin I wasn't quite ready to occupy. I sat in my oversized leather armchair, the one worn smooth by years of late-night strategizing, but now I looked small in it. I felt small. I am Harold Vance, 74 years old, a man who built a logistics empire from a single rusty van and a stubborn refusal to quit. I have shaken hands with presidents and stared down union bosses who threatened to break my legs. But today, I was being reduced to a password on a sticky note. Marcus sat at my mahogany desk, the desk I had bought when I made my first million, the desk where I had signed the contracts that paid for his private school and his Ivy League degree. His fingers flew across the keys, migrating my accounts, changing my security questions, and linking my identity to his own. He was humming. It was a low, distracted sound, the kind a man makes when he is assembling a piece of furniture, not dismantling his father's existence. Tara stood behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Her nails were painted a sharp blood red, and her eyes were fixed on the screen with a hunger that looked like love but smelled like greed. She was whispering instructions, pointing at the monitor. "Make sure you get the secondary authentication routed to your phone, babe," she murmured. "Already done," Marcus replied, not looking up. "I'm setting up the joint tenancy now. It's cleaner this way, if anything happens." They thought I was losing my grip. They thought the stroke I suffered 6 months ago had turned my brain into Swiss cheese. I let them think it. I let my hand tremble when I held my coffee cup, splashing a little on my cardigan. I let my speech slur just a fraction more than necessary, dropping consonants like loose change. It was a camouflage, a survival tactic I had learned in the boardroom decades ago. Play the fool, and the wolves will reveal their throats. They weren't just taking over my finances, they were stealing my identity. They were setting up joint tenancy, accessing my credit lines, and forging my digital signature to expedite the process. They wanted the prestige of being Harold Vance, without the work.
They wanted the golden handcuffs, but they didn't realize those cuffs were locked to a sinking ship. "Dad, we're just modernizing the portfolio," Marcus said, spinning the chair around to face me. His smile was bright, practiced. It was the smile of a salesman closing a deal with a mark he knew couldn't say no. "We're consolidating assets for your protection. You know how scammers target the elderly. This way, Tara and I can monitor everything." "Firewall," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue like it was foreign. "It's very safe, Harold," Tara added, walking over to pat my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. "We just want you to relax. You worked so hard." I looked at them. My son, my daughter-in-law, the people who were supposed to be my legacy. If you have ever sat in a room and watched the people you changed diapers for strip mine your dignity like a vein of coal, hoping you die before the money runs out, hit that subscribe button. Because I didn't stop them. I didn't scream. I watched Marcus click transfer on my primary holding account, a smirk playing on his lips, and I felt a cold, hard stone of resolve settle in my gut. I wasn't just losing my money, I was losing my name. But they didn't know what that name was currently attached to. They didn't know the weight of the crown they were so eager to steal. The emotional fallout was a quiet, suffocating thing. That night, lying in the guest room, because they had moved into the master suite to be closer to the office, I stared at the ceiling fan and felt the ghost of my life hovering nearby. The betrayal wasn't a sharp knife, it was a heavy blanket smothering me. I remembered teaching Marcus to ride a bike, running alongside him, promising him I'd always catch him if he fell. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated, the hope that he would be better than me. Now he was pushing me off the cliff, convinced I was too blind to see the edge. But suspicion had already planted its seed weeks ago. I had seen the mail disappearing before I could get to the box. I had seen the hushed conversation stop abruptly when I entered the room. I had noticed the way Tara looked at the furniture, appraising it, mentally putting price tags on the heirlooms my wife Eleanor had cherished. My evidence gathering had to be analog in a digital war. I couldn't use the computer, they monitor the keystrokes. I couldn't use my phone, they tracked the location. so I used the library.
I shuffled out the next morning, wearing my old trench coat, claiming I was going to feed the ducks at the park. "Don't be too long, Dad," Marcus called out from the kitchen, sipping coffee from my favorite mug. "Just the ducks," I mumbled. I walked 3 blocks to the park, then doubled back to the public library. I printed what I could. Then I met Saul. Saul was my oldest friend, a retired forensic accountant for the IRS, who smoked cigars that smelled like burning tires and possessed a mind like a steel trap. We sat on a park bench, freezing in the November chill, our breath misting in the air. I handed him the crumpled statements I had fished out of the recycling bin, flattened against my thigh. "They've done it, Saul," I whispered, tearing a piece of bread and tossing it to a pigeon. "They've linked everything. They assumed the power of attorney and then used it to co-sign the loans and transfer the Vance Holdings shell into their personal portfolio." Saul looked at the papers, his bushy gray eyebrows knitting together. He adjusted his thick glasses. "Harold, this is aggressive. They've legally entangled themselves with every asset you own." "I know," I said. Saul asked, looking up at me sharply. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I never told them. I was trying to fix it quietly. I was negotiating the settlement when the stroke hit. The IRS froze the assets pending the penalty payment. It's a $2 million lien, Saul, plus interest." Saul looked at me, silence stretching between us. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. "Harold, if they assumed your identity, they inherited the debt," I finished. "They didn't just steal the car. They stole the car that's already flying off the cliff. They think they unlocked a vault." "It's a poison pill," Saul chuckled, shaking his head. "A $2 million poison pill." "I'm a father," I said softly, the humor fading. "I'm a father who realized his son loves money more than he loves me. He wants to be Harold Vance? Fine." The flashback hit me then, visceral and sharp. I remembered the day Marcus asked for a loan 10 years ago. I refused, because I wanted him to learn independence, to build something from scratch like I did. He had looked at me with such hate that day. "You hoard it all," he had spat. That hate had fermented into this theft. He wasn't stealing for survival. He was stealing for revenge. He wanted to be the big man.
He wanted to prove he could take what I wouldn't give. Saul asked. "The Cayman account," I said. "I left the file for the Grand Cayman Reserve on the desk. It looks like a secret stash." Saul whistled low. "They trigger a federal investigation," I said. "They go to prison," Saul finished. I stood up, my knees aching in the cold. "I have to get back." "Be careful, Harold," Saul said, gripping my arm. "I'm counting on it," I said. The midpoint twist came that evening. I returned home to find the house smelling of expensive steak and victory. They were celebrating. A bottle of my vintage champagne, a 1998 Dom Perignon I was saving for my 75th birthday, was open on the counter. Marcus's face was flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. "Marcus!" shouted when I walked in. He grabbed me by the shoulders, almost knocking me over. "We managed to unlock the Grand Cayman Reserve. I don't know why you kept that password so hidden, but Tara cracked it." They had found the bait. They had swallowed the hook. "We moved the funds," Tara said, walking in from the dining room, holding a crystal flute. "We're going to buy the lake house, Harold, the one you always said was too expensive. In your name, of course, but we'll manage it." My heart hammered against my ribs. By accessing that account and moving funds, they had just tripped the federal wire. They had crossed the line from civil mismanagement to criminal wire fraud. The IRS software would pick up the transaction within hours. They thought they had unlocked a fortune. They had just unlocked the prison cell. I looked at my son. He looked so proud of himself. He looked so confident, standing there in my kitchen, drinking my wine, spending my money. He had no idea that the noose was already around his neck, and he had just kicked away the chair. I smiled. A weak, trembling old man smile. I let my eyes water. "That's wonderful, son," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "I always wanted that lake house."
I'm sure you'll do great things with it. I am, Dad, he said, refilling his glass. I shuffled to my room, leaving them to their celebration. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the digital clock. The IRS agents usually moved at dawn. I had 12 hours. 12 hours to mourn the son I had lost before the world saw the criminal he had become. I lay down, but I didn't sleep.
I listened to their laughter through the thin walls, waiting for the silence that would inevitably follow. The collapse of a man's life rarely happens in a courtroom, amidst the bang of gavels and the scratch of stenographers' pens. No, the true demolition usually happens in the places where the ego feels safest. In my son's case, it happened at a cocktail party, which is the natural habitat of the pretentious thief. 2 weeks after Marcus and Tara had stole my identity, merging our financial souls, linking my credit to their appetites, and assuming legal ownership of my past to fund their future, they threw a gala. The audacity of the name stung worse than the theft. There was just Vance, the man who built it, and the son who was currently looting it. They rented the grand ballroom at the downtown Ritz-Carlton, burning through credit lines that they thought were backed by my millions, but were actually backed by a federal tax lien ticking down like a dirty bomb in a suitcase. I stood by the shrimp cocktail tower, an extravagant sculpture of ice and shellfish that probably cost more than my first car. I was wearing my old tuxedo, the one I bought 30 years ago. It smelled slightly of mothballs and cedar, a scent that marked me as a relic in this room of bespoke Italian wool and silk. I was the prop. I was the silent patriarch, propped up in the corner like a cardboard cutout to lend legitimacy to their fraud. They needed me here to show the investors, the sharks circling the water, that the transition of power was peaceful, that the old lion had willingly laid down to let the cubs eat. Marcus was holding court in the center of the room, beneath a crystal chandelier that scattered light across his flushed face. He was wearing a suit that I knew cost $6,000, because I had seen the alert on my phone before they changed the notification settings. He was laughing too loudly, a braying, confident sound that grated on my nerves. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and the shoulder of a potential investor in the other. "It's about vision, really," I heard him say, his voice projected just enough for me to hear. Dad built a great foundation, sure. Logistics is a gritty business, but Vance & Son is about streamlining. We're moving into tech-integrated supply chains. Agile, I thought. That was a nice word for theft. Tara was circulating near the bar, her wrist flashing under the recessed lighting. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that was thick enough to be vulgar. I stared at it. I knew the receipt for that bracelet. It was purchased 3 days ago on a credit card linked to my identity, an identity that was currently red-flagged by the Department of Treasury for suspicious activity regarding the frozen Cayman accounts. She was wearing evidence on her wrist and calling it fashion. "Dad, try not to look so sour," Tara whispered, gliding past me with a plate of canapés. She smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. "Smile! People are watching." "I'm just tired, Tara," I mumbled, leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part they had scripted for me. "The lights. Just hold it together for another hour," she hissed, her smile never wavering for the room. "Then we can send you back to the condo." The emotional triggers were everywhere, little landmines of memory exploding in my face. I saw Frank Sterling, an old business partner of mine from the 90s, walking toward me. Frank and I had survived the recession together. We had lent each other payroll money on a handshake. Now he looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Harold," Frank said, gripping my hand. His grip was loose, gentle, the way you touch something broken. "Good to see you out. Marcus tells me you're taking a step back." I looked at Frank. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to grab his lapels and scream that my son was a parasite who had forged my digital life. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap had to snap shut with everyone watching. "Yes, Frank," I said, my voice shaking just enough to sell the lie. "Marcus is taking care of everything now." "Well," Frank said, glancing over at Marcus, who was toasting the air. "He certainly has energy." He walked away, and I felt the isolation wrap around me like a cold coat. They thought I was senile.
They thought I willingly handed the reins to this peacock because my mind was going soft. I let them think it. The gaslighting had been severe these last few weeks. Marcus telling me I forgot signing the transfer deeds when I knew I hadn't. Tara telling me I imagined the threatening letters from creditors that I had found in the trash. They had tried to make me question my own reality, to fracture my mind so they could inhabit my life. But standing there, gripping the head of my cane until my knuckles turned white, I felt a core of steel in my spine that hadn't been there in years. I wasn't the victim.
I was the executioner waiting for the drop. I was the man who had built the scaffold, and they were dancing on the trapdoor. Marcus stepped up to the microphone stage, tapping the mic for attention. The room quieted. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus boomed, beaming at the crowd. "Tonight is about the future. It's about taking the legacy my father started and launching it into the stratosphere." He raised his glass. "To the future," the room echoed. And then the double doors to the ballroom burst open. It wasn't a guest. It wasn't the caterer. It was a phalanx of 6 men and women wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. The lettering didn't say police. It didn't say security. It said IRS, Criminal Investigation Division. The band stopped playing immediately. The drummer caught his cymbal to silence it. The silence didn't fall. It crashed into the room, heavy and suffocating. Marcus froze on stage, his glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at the agents, blinking rapidly. Then he looked at me. His instinct, honed by 40 years of being bailed out, kicked in. He expected me to step forward. He expected Dad to fix it. He expected me to write a check or call a senator. Agent Miller, a man Saul had introduced me to years ago, a man who looked like he carved his own furniture out of granite, stepped into the center of the room. He ignored the guests. His eyes were locked on the stage. "Marcus Vance?" Miller's voice was a flat, projected baritone that needed no microphone. "This is a private event," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, the confidence evaporating like mist. He stepped down from the stage, his hands shaking. "My father is right there. If this is about the corporate taxes, talk to him." He pointed at me. He tried to throw me to the wolves one last time. "We aren't here for Harold," Miller said. He didn't even look at me. "We are here for the legal owners of the Vance Consolidated Entity and the holders of the Grand Cayman Reserve account. According to the documents you filed last week with the Secretary of State and the digital signatures you used to access the frozen Cayman accounts yesterday, that is you." Miller held up a warrant. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of Marcus's lungs. You could hear the ice melting in the silence. Tara shrieked, dropping her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound violent and sharp.
She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisting into a mask of panic. "He owes that. We just managed the money." "Ignorance is not a defense when you sign a power of attorney stating you have full knowledge of the financial state," Miller countered, stepping closer. "And then you transfer the assets into your personal names. You set up joint tenancy. You merged your credit profiles." Miller paused, looking around the room, ensuring every investor heard this next part. "By commingling the funds and using his identity to secure new loans for your personal use, you pierced the corporate veil. The debt isn't the company's anymore. It's yours, personally. And since you used the stolen identity to defraud the bank to pay for this party." The community reaction was brutal and immediate. I watched the investors, the sharks who had been toasting Marcus seconds ago, physically back away, creating a wide circle around the couple. I saw Frank Sterling pull out his phone, likely calling his own lawyers to cancel any deals. I watched the friends Tara had invited pull out their phones to record the downfall. Marcus looked at me. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the agents closing in, then back at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. "He owes that. Dad, tell them it's your mess." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had sat at my desk and erased me. I looked at the daughter-in-law who wore my credit rating on her wrist. I dropped my cane. It clattered loudly on the floor. I straightened my back. The slump vanished. The tremor in my hands ceased. I took a step forward, then another.
walking with a steady, powerful rhythm that I hadn't shown in 6 months. The limp was gone. I walked right up to Marcus. I stood tall, looking down at the son who had tried to bury me before I was dead. "I tried to tell you, Marcus," I said, my voice calm, clear, and resonant. It was the voice that had built an empire. "I tried to tell you about the hard years, about the risks, about the audit I was fighting. But you didn't want to hear about the work. You didn't want the responsibility. You just wanted the name." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear radiating off him. "Well, congratulations, son. You're him," Tara begged, grabbing my arm. "You can't let them take us." I gently removed her hand from my tuxedo sleeve, as if she were a piece of lint. "Family doesn't steal names, Tara."
Agent Miller nodded to his team. As they handcuffed him, the visual was striking. The shiny, gold cufflinks Marcus had bought with my money clinking against the cold, industrial steel of the federal handcuffs. Tara was crying, mascara running down her face in black streaks, screaming about her rights, screaming that she needed her lawyer. "You have the right to remain silent," an agent said, pushing her forward. Marcus looked back at me one last time as they marched him toward the double doors. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had realized the monsters were real, and he was one of them. I didn't look away. I watched them go. I watched the doors swing shut behind them, sealing their fate. The room was buzzing now, a hive of whispers and shock. People were looking at me, waiting for me to collapse, to weep, to explain. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked out the side exit, leaving the chaos, the shrimp tower, and the ruins of my son's ambition behind. I met Saul outside by the valet stand. He was leaning against his old Buick, smoking one of those terrible cigars. The smoke curled into the night air. He handed me a manila folder. "The whistleblower reward," Saul said, his voice gravelly. "Since he reported the identity theft and wire fraud yourself, and since your testimony helped them recover the assets from Marcus's personal accounts before he could squander them, the IRS cut a deal. Your personal pension is safe." I took the folder. It felt light. "You destroyed them, Harold," Saul said quietly. "They destroyed themselves, Saul," I said, taking a deep breath of the cold night air. It tasted crisp. "Here," Saul said, reaching into his pocket. "Half the reward is yours by rights, but—" He tried to hand me a check. "Keep it," I said, pushing his hand away. "I don't need much. I have my health." I walked away from the hotel, down the city street. I walked to the nearest diner, a greasy spoon with flickering neon that buzzed like a dying fly. I sat in a vinyl booth that was cracked and taped over. I ordered a slice of cherry pie and a black coffee. I sat there, alone. I had no fortune left. That would be tied up in litigation for years. I had no empire. I had no family. But for the first time in 6 months, I had my name back. I was Harold Vance. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a password. I wasn't a burden. I was a man who had faced the worst betrayal imaginable, and remained standing.
The silence in the diner wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a debt paid in full. I took a bite of the pie. It was cheap, sugary, and artificial. But to me, it tasted like sweet, unadulterated freedom.